This is an excerpt from a book entitled A Random Life. It's 1975, and my required psychiatric rotation was at Mount Pleasant Mental Hospital in Mount Pleasant, Iowa. It was a particularly snowy winter that year, and Donette and Robert were over 4 hours' drive away when it was good weather. I was not looking forward to this rotation because I would be away from Donette for 6 weeks. I was only able to go home every other weekend if the weather was good, which it frequently wasn't. It was a very old hospital built out of stone and brick. It could have easily been the setting for the movie One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest. It housed the worst of the worst. When I arrived, I was given a small dorm room that had a single bed, tiny refrigerator, and a desk with a gooseneck lamp. I believe these rooms were the old, unused nuns' quarters when nuns took care of the patients in the hospital. My first day there, I was assigned to a social worker who was obviously not happy with having a new student assigned to her. I could see her drop her shoulders, roll her eyes, and she shook her head at being told the news. She glanced at me in the other room and reluctantly motioned with her hand for me to accompany her. As we walked, she started asking questions. She asked if I was married and had children. I answered yes, and I have a son. She wanted to know my birthday and Donette's birthday. She suddenly stopped walking, turned to me and said, "Oh, Scorpio and Pisces. You're not compatible. You will never make it together." She turned and started walking again. That took me by surprise. She callously uttered that statement as if it was a universal truth and a matter of fact. She didn't know us. I had only met her 10 minutes ago, and now she flippantly says we will never make it? I loved Donette with all my heart. She ushered me into a small room, sat me down, put a booklet on the table in front of me, then said, "This is the MMPI test that we give all the new patients. When you are finished, bring it out and I will score it for you." Then she left the room and closed the door. I heard her say to a coworker, "That will keep him occupied for a while." MMPI stands for Minnesota Multiphasic Personality Inventory. It's 338 questions with multiple choice answers. I was still not happy about the "you will never make it" statement. But as a student, I didn't say anything. I felt as though my family had been attacked, and all of the protective defense mechanisms of a man in love with his family welled up inside of me. This was my family, and I loved them with all my heart. Love is emotional and never logical. I opened the test booklet and started reading the test as she had requested. The questions were simple questions, and you choose the multiple choice answer that you felt best fits you. Very quickly, I realized that it asked the same question 4 different times in 4 different ways. The idea behind this is that a so-called normal person will answer the question the same each time. If the question is, "What is your favorite color?" and your favorite color is blue, you will answer blue each time the question is asked differently. Depending on how you answer the questions determines the scope of your personality. A thought crossed my mind, and it was not a logical thought. It was a defiantly and emotional thought. A thought that made a smile, or better yet, a smirk appear on my face. A diabolical plan had just been hatched. I made sure that I answered each of the 4 versions of each question differently. When completed, I went to her desk and calmly handed the test papers to her. She gave a sigh of inconvenience, opened a drawer, pulled out a template, and laid it over the answer sheet. If you don't read the questions in a multiple choice test and just randomly mark answers without reading them, statistically you will still get some answers that match. I was sure that she would notice this, and realized that I had purposely sabotaged the test and we could discuss her flippant comment. But she didn't. Her eyes suddenly became very large. She turned pale as if every drop of blood had suddenly drained from her face. She shoved the test and template across the desk over to where I stood, then said, "Here, you score it yourself." She very quickly stood up and briskly walked out of the room as if she was late for an appointment. I did as she asked. I used the template and scored the test, even though I knew it was going to be false. Let me, if I may, translate what it said from psychiatric speak into layman's terms. It read, "Homicidal sex maniac." Well, this didn't turn out quite as I had expected. I gave a muffled, nervous laugh that was heard by other staff in the room. I mistakenly left the test on her desk and exited through an open door. I went back to my dorm room, sat down on the bed, and remorse started to set in. That may have been one of the dumbest things I have ever done. The next day, upon arising, I received a handwritten message slipped under the door of my dorm room. It said to report to the psychiatrist at the locked male ward as his new student. When I reported to the psychiatrist that morning, I was greeted by a psychiatrist with a very strange look on his face. He said, "You're my new student?" I said, "That's what they told me." He replied, "Have you had psychiatric training in the past? Because I usually get residents. They never send me new students. Why would they send a new student to the most dangerous lockup ward in the hospital?" I asked if I may sit down, and he motioned with his hand to take a seat. I explained the "you will never make it" statement from the social worker that caused every protective instinct in my body to well up, and what I did with the MMPI test as a result. I told him about the handwritten note slipped under my dorm room door, and I handed it to him. Then I said, "This morning, on my way here, people coming toward me in the hallway all moved over against the wall and stared at me as I went by. I ducked into the restroom to look at my clothing and to make sure my fly wasn't open. It wasn't. When the Catholic chaplain got off the elevator that I was waiting for, he gave me the sign of the cross and uttered something in Latin as he moved sideways away from me along the wall. I smiled and thanked him. For what? I don't know. As I sat there across the desk from the psychiatrist, feeling rather foolish about what I had done and fearful that I may be kicked out of school, I could see a smile slowly appearing on the psychiatrist's face. He leaned back in his overstuffed leather chair, crossed his arms in front of him, looked up at the ceiling, and began to roar with laughter as he realized why I had been sent to him. He laughed so loud, his secretary came into the room and asked, "Is everything all right?" Still laughing, the psychiatrist said, "Mary, this is our new student for the next 6 weeks. Would you introduce him to the staff and make sure he has what he needs?" She looked at me with a strange look on her face and said, "New student?" He clasped his hands together in front of him, turned to me and said, "We are going to do just fine. It's a pleasure to meet you. How long do you think we should wait before we tell them what you did?" I replied, "I don't care if we ever tell them." He replied, No, we need to tell them. I think a week will be just right. It will take them at least that long to organize their pitchforks and torches." I said, "Pitchforks and torches?" He replied, "That's a metaphor. I'm definitely looking forward to this Friday's staff meeting." As Mary took me to meet the other staff on the ward, we could hear him still laughing. She said, "Whatever you did sure made his day." The next 6 weeks were very interesting. After the Friday staff meeting, which I was not allowed to attend, people stopped hugging the walls in the hallways and said good morning with a smile. Security guards would laugh and give me the thumbs up sign. The Catholic chaplain still gave me the sign of the cross and said, "Bless you, my son." I said, "You know, Father, I'm not Catholic." He said, "It doesn't matter. God works in mysterious ways," and he walked away laughing. I didn't see the social worker again, but I was told she was still around. I learned a great deal about people in those 6 weeks, and what a fine line there is between sanity and insanity, along with how little it takes for some sane people to lose it. Also, how quickly a rumor can spread and be believed. I now realize how very fortunate that I didn't end up on the ward as a patient or kicked out of school. At the end of the 6 weeks, the psychiatrist wanted to know what I thought about my experience with patients and did I learn anything useful. I responded in glowing terms befitting a student who wanted a good grade, but I had learned a great deal. Then he said, "What do you think about the people we have that hear voices? What if it's not all in their head and some actually hear voices? We know so very little about how the brain actually functions." He smiled and said, "Never mind. Have a safe trip home and a wonderful Christmas. It's been a pleasure having you here, and I am definitely going to use the MMPI story in my lectures." I drove through a blizzard that night and was immensely glad and thankful to be home with Donette and Robert that Christmas. Even though we didn't have much, we had each other. Love is a very powerful emotion and is not logical. It can result in immense joy, immense pain, and yes, a little stupidity. I love my family with all my heart.